Now that we've got the lines, the high pressure lines from each of the compressors swapped to the other compressor, I would like to review one thing that I probably should have reviewed before starting that process. I've done this several times, so I just take it for granted, but I don't think you should until you've done it several times too. The point that I need to make here is that when working on the right compressor, the left one you don't need to worry about because of the way the line happens to come off, the direction that it comes off away from where the electronics and the plastic cap are. On this right one, however, the plastic cap is situated so that if you've rotated, when you've gone and put your high pressure line back onto the right compressor, if you've rotated this line too far in that direction, you won't be able to get this cap on and off. You can see how close the cap is to the top of this line. So if this high pressure line had been rotated in this direction by another 10 degrees or so, this cap probably wouldn't be able to come off. So that's something that you've got to be on the lookout for before you braze these in place on the right compressors. Again, left one you don't have to worry about so much, it's just this right one. But now that we've cleared that up, I'd like to move on with further modifications that have to be made on these compressors before they get mounted. Now, the modifications we're going to do now could easily be done once they get mounted. But I figure since it's a bad day outside, might as well do this inside. And it's actually a little easier when it's right up to you. You don't have to lean over the car at all. Everything's right here at good working height. So I figure why not do it here and now? So the things that we've still got to do at some point that we're going to do now are to swage this 1/4 inch line. It's got to eventually, once it gets installed and we have the copper lines in place, the 1/4 inch copper line coming from the condenser is going to have to be brazed to this. So we need to swage either that line or this line. And I prefer to swage the lower of the two lines so that other line can simply fit down inside of it. It's easier to braze with the silver solder in the downward direction than it is in the upward direction. I will caution though that when you go to do that braze, these very small openings inside of these lines, these 1/4 inch lines, it's only 1/8 of an inch. They can get occluded really easy from the silver solder, especially if you're getting a lot of this hot and not just at the end of the line. We'll go over that again when we do the brazing, but just giving you a tip before we do get that far. The other thing that we still need to do is make some changes to the suction line. Because we're going to be brazing on this line, I've gone ahead and made some cuts in the insulation so we can remove that. So this mechanical fitting has to be removed just like we did on the high pressure lines. And then this line, just like we're going to do on this high pressure line, has to be swaged also. So let's get started with those three things. I have already gone over the use in general of the swaging tool, the hydraulic swaging tool that Hilmort sells. What I'd like to say now is that when you go to take and insert the end of this swaging tool into the 1/4 inch line, it's not going to fit. The whole thing won't fit at this point. It's just too tight. However, they've made these fittings so that you can account for that. At the very end of this thing, if you look real close, you can see that there's a very shortened but narrower end to this. And what we do with that is we simply put that into the end of the pipe and allow just the very end of the pipe to be widened so we can get the rest of this down inside. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, as you can see, I wasn't able to get the whole thing inside of it, just the tip of it. But now that I've done that, I can get the entire thing inside. But as I mentioned in an earlier video, I don't like trying to swage these small 1/4 inch lines until I've had a chance to heat them up. Oftentimes they tear on the very end. So that's what I'll do here before swaging this. Once it's heated, I can feel much more confident that it's not going to tear. Okay, I've got the torch here. I've got the pump in proper positioning. So let's go ahead and heat that up so we can swage. So I don't want to heat it much, just the very end of it. It doesn't even need to get red hot, so that's enough. So we'll go and stick this swage tool back inside and quickly swage it before it cools too much. There we go. The trigger actually has a stop on it, so you can't swage too far. That's what I like about this tool. So there you have. The swaging process on the 1/4 inch line is finished and it didn't tear. The wall's been thinned out, so it couldn't afford to be stretched much more than that. But it's done, and now it's ready to accept a 1/4 inch piece of pipe, and that'll make the job of brazing later that much easier. So that's done. Now let's move on to heating up this fitting and removing it from the 3/8 inch line. Now this stuff always gets hot, so it's good to have a pair of pliers to grab this stuff with that you don't mind getting oxidized. Now I've cut this insulation away in hopes that I won't heat it up so badly that it catches on fire. But that does happen from time to time, and it's easier, very easy to blow out. So I'm heating mostly towards the top. That's where it's thickest. And I'm gradually moving it down lower. And I'll slowly and gently wiggle this thing back and forth. I'm looking for it to slowly become loose. And I can feel it beginning to move now. And there's the fitting. So now what I'll do is, since I've already got that heated up, is I'll put the 3/8 inch fitting on the swage tool, and we'll go ahead and swage that while it's good and hot. So I've got the 3/8 tip on this now. And just like before, it may not want to fit down in the pipe right away. We may have to widen it up enough with the very end of the tip. Then we can insert the whole thing, as I've just done. And I just slowly pump. Now, some people recommend widen it about halfway, then releasing, rotating about 10 degrees, and then expanding it the rest of the way. Some people say that it's less likely to rip when you do that. But there you go. And you can see by looking down inside that I have no, at least not yet anyway, I don't have any oxidation on the inside of that. So I haven't heated it so much where it's gotten black. So far, so good. Now that both of these lines have the mechanical fittings removed and the ends swaged, I'll go ahead and do the same thing to the other one, and then we'll be able to get them installed on the vehicle. I've got the compressors here at the back of the car. They're not installed yet, but what I wanted to point out was a couple important things. I've also got the dual Zyvan mounting bracket here as well, just to show that the drain pans have to be pushed forward enough so that this dual Zyvan bracket can be mounted. If these pans are pushed back too far, we won't be able to mount that. So I always like to have one if I'm doing this installation in a vehicle that doesn't already have the dual Zyvans in it, just so I know how far forward I need to push these drain pans. The other thing I'd like to mention is that it's going to be a while yet before all the components are installed, the condensers, the evaporators, and the copper piping. So it's going to be several days in this case, and in a normal case it might be 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours anyway, before you go to hook up the copper lines. So I definitely recommend sealing these copper pipe ends and putting the caps onto these ports to seal them. That way you will get as little water in the oil as possible. I know I've mentioned that time and again, but it is such a critical factor for later when it comes to drawing the water out of the system with a vacuum pump. And these little things can eliminate hours if they're done and done properly. So now the next step in getting these compressors installed is nothing more than making marks with a magic marker where I need to place my drill holes. So what I'll do is I'll make those marks, use a 3/8 inch drill bit to drill out the frame so that I can then insert a 4-inch long M8 bolt, 4 of them, 2 per compressor. Then we'll put nylon nuts and washers on the ends of those, and they'll be fully installed at that point.